Hi, guys. Welcome to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. This is Vevna Forrow. Yeah, let's get started. All right, guys. So previously on the podcast, we were going over Cosmic Core Monthly. Again, they have a pretty cool mobile app for their issues. So check out that episode. Also, listen back to the last couple. I was showing you horror magazines, lit mags, journals, presses again, because it's October, right? We're sort of in that Halloween, season of the year, right? And holiday coming up. So, yeah. And I think on that podcast and the other ones, I shared some fun movie recs. So totally along this podcast, you also get movie recommendations from me, memory clips shared, all kinds of stuff, resources. So trying to just be helpful as possible, and also do an audio diary of my experiences in the literary arts, world and community, right, of lit mags. Yeah. So just before we get started here, I've been going through some of my volunteer staff's movie recommendations too, and I completely forgot, on this podcast I mentioned Tremors, right? That, movie franchise. But one of the first ever, monster creature films I watched, growing up as a kid was actually Komodo. Komodo was one of my all-time faves. The 1999 movie, if you've never seen it, watch it. I know it got a super bad rating, if you go on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, right? But to me, there was just something so memorable about Komodo when I watched it as a kid. And I was like, it was just an interesting storyline, these giant Komodos, right? Well, they're not super, super giant, but they're large, right? Komodos and, to me, that was always a very memorable movie, Komodo 1999. And then I was a huge fan, my dad is too, of the Anaconda, series. Not all of them. I think some of the other ones down the road got a bit too overkill on the CGI, right? It's too unrealistic, right? To a point where you can tell it's totally computer generate. I think the first Anaconda was really good, and then the second one was probably my favorite, Anaconda and the Blood Orchid, the 2004 film. I thought that one was fairly good, So yeah, the first two I really liked. And the others, I heard they're actually doing a reboot, right, with Jack Black and a couple other actors, right, well known. And yeah, it seems to be more of the comedy route, so it looks kind of fun. So I might hopefully can watch it, and when as soon as it comes out, we'll see. But yeah, definitely a fan of Anaconda series, or snake movies, crocodile, alligator movies, and Tremors, of course, right? Totally. So if you haven't seen any of those ones I mentioned, check that out. And so I think in terms of today's podcast episode, I just want to cover a question real quick. And it's a question I don't have extensive experience with. It's a gray area, you could say, one of those LOK, lack of knowledge, I abbreviate that, or limited knowledge topics I have on. But I am aware of, some things in regards to it. You may have noticed it, if you looked at the title. So, the question is, should I, make my literary arts magazine, nonprofit? Should I, apply for a nonprofit status for my lit mag or journal, or, publication house, right? So in terms of that, guys, I'm sure you saw on this podcast, I showed you a couple nonprofits, right? The 501, right? And so 501c3 organizations, just let's go from the top of that. I'm going to quote this off of Wikipedia because, and Wikipedia is not 100% accurate all the time, but it may help you for those of you not aware of the definition of it. So I'll put a link to the description of anything I quote off of. But yeah, so a 501c3 organization is a United States corporation, trust, unincorporated association, or other type of organization exempt from federal income tax under Section 501c3 of Title 26 of the United States Code. It is one of the 29 types of 501c nonprofit organizations in the U.S. 501c3 tax exemptions apply to entities that are organized and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, literary, or educational purposes, for testing for testing for public safety, to foster national or international amateur sports competition, or for the prevention of cruelty to children or animals. 501c3 exemption applies also for any non-incorporated community trust, fund, cooperating association, or foundation organized and operated exclusively for those purposes. And then it goes into here, 26 USC, it looks like 170. It mentions a deduction for federal income tax purposes for some donors who make charitable donations to most types of 501c3 organizations, among others. And regulations specify which such deductions must be verifiable to be allowed. Example given: receipts for donations of $250 or more. Due to the tax deductions associated with donations, loss of 501c3 status can be highly challenging, if not fatal, to a charity's continued operation, as many foundations and corporate matching funds do not grant funds to a charity without such status, and individual donors often do not donate to such a charity due to the unavailability of tax deduction for contributions. Yeah, so just wanted to share that. It goes into obtaining status and things here, right? And the basic requirements, right? And filing. So there's, I believe, now I'm not 100% sure because I haven't gone through the process myself. This is just some stuff, I've researched, maybe have come across, just also have heard from friends in the community and other things. So there is, I believe, a filing fee, right? Of some kind, right? And the application process, right? It's it's not just like where you apply and you automatically get it and you can instantly get funding. That's not how it works. Just because you're a nonprofit, right, that doesn't mean it's going to solve all your funding problems at all. No. So funding isn't guaranteed, obviously, right? You have to apply to, once you get your, nonprofit status, right, you have to apply to those, grants or opportunities for funding, right? It's not like automatically given to anyone. And it's you can't always, sustain funding year after year. Some places are unable to because it's very competitive. Think about all the other nonprofits out there, like, literary magazines and, publishing places, right, that are nonprofits. It's very tough. And I would say, if you are, really, let's say you have tried, everything possible in terms of, raising funds. Like, let's say you've paywalled some bonus content through a Patreon or even Substack, or you've tried a merch shop, you tried, doing a series or additional series, right, for your online publication, doing a print or digital issue series of some kind. Monotonized, or something where, subscriber fees are involved, or, you do print and digital subscriptions, but you're still just scraping by or barely cutting it. A lot of lit mags and journals are, constantly, nearing the red, and the problem is, right, so if you're going to run a lit mag journal or press, right, you can't be in the red year after year after year after year. At some point in time, you have to have, a profit margin or revenue there where you can apply that to, the series to grow it, right? If you keep getting in the red, even with businesses, right? If you keep going in the red and you're facing loss after loss after loss, right? It's going to be very tough to grow. It's going to be a lot of pressure on you, right? The founding editor. And eventually you're going to want to, because of that, or have to, you may not, obviously don't want to, but you'll have to close it down because of those financial pressures, right? So there are, a lot of funding opportunities to apply for once you achieve that nonprofit status. For example, right, I was, we're the Lit Mag or Journal Press I run, Dipty, we're not currently a nonprofit. I had thought about it at some point in time. It crossed my mind a couple of times because every time I looked at, funding opportunities, it was like, oh, you have to be a nonprofit. You can't apply this if you're not a nonprofit. Most recently, there was a funding, application window for literary magazines and presses, I should say. And I applied to it. I was just like, I'm going to try. And they were like, I was just curious, So they were like, your series does not comply with what we're looking for, like the focus of it. So there are some funding opportunities that are geared for solely fiction, solely nonfiction, right? You have to be very mindful about that. And yeah, so they're like, no, we can't proceed with entering you in the funding, it's a whole, process for selection and everything that they undergo. So we couldn't even enter the selection, or be on the selection list of possible ones, right? We couldn't go forward because of that. So you have to be, you have to be mindful again about guidelines and things like that, right, with any funding opportunities. But yeah, that was one recently, actually. I can't remember what it was called, but it wasn't for nonprofits at all. So it was open to presses in general. And I was like, ah, darn. So yeah, absolutely. Yes, there are a lot of funding opportunities out there for nonprofits. However, it's very, very competitive and tight to get those. To do that, it's going to take, more work from you, right? The founding editor of the Lit Mag Journal, to apply to those, right? To write letters, to really do that, and this year especially, a lot of funding was cut for Lit Mag Journal and presses, a lot of nonprofits, right? Absolutely. NEA, right, got slashed. A lot of funding opportunities. So many things have gotten, cut lately, just in the world in general, like slashed. So it's been very heartbreaking. So there are benefits to becoming nonprofit, and there are also, disadvantages, or I should say risks, to becoming a nonprofit. And you want to really think about this. So, if you are not in compliance with, your nonprofit regulations, right, there are things you have to do, right, to maintain that status. So if you are not organized and not keeping track of where all the money is going, you're going to get into a lot of hot water, right? You're going to end up to a lot of trouble. And that trouble can entail fines, or rather penalties. If you do research on the nonprofit status, right, and search, penalties or fines for, not following nonprofit status regulations, or not being in compliance with it, some of those fines go as high as, $10,000, $12,000. And I think they do it based on your gross receipts or revenue, right? How much the fine is. And I've seen even things, based on, gross receipts or revenue, right, showing 50,000 or something like that, right? So it could wipe you out, totally. It could be a very costly penalty or fine that you face. And that can be, a fatal blow, as this Wikipedia article stated, a little bit. It could be a, fatal blow to your Lit Mag Journal Press or nonprofit organization in general. So, some large publishing houses, lit mags, journals, or some that are, even medium-sized ones, they have a board of directors. They have someone overseeing, helping with decisions and things like that. Or they may even have someone who does all of their bookkeeping or accounting and record keepings, oversees all of that stuff, manages it, maybe part-time or full-time. It could be a volunteer, it could be a staff member even. But I think that's so important, because if you are not on top of, all of your filing records, all of that stuff, you're gonna just be in a lot. It's gonna be messy for you. You're going to, again, be at risk of facing penalties and fines. Absolutely, it's going to happen, and that's very dangerous, right? So there are dangers to, not being organized, right, with your nonprofit status. You have to be on top of where all the money is going. You have to really have good record keeping of that. I used to do IT support for financial departments and accountants and stuff too. And I really saw, the applications they're using, and a little bit insight into the extent of their work, a little bit, you could say, the Excel spreadsheets, all of that, troubleshooting it. And it's a lot. You really have to be careful. You can get into a lot of trouble. You can get shut down. Those fines, those penalties, they can really hit you hard. Nonprofits, absolutely. So there is a lot of risk there. But as I showed you on this podcast, some lit mags, they paused, right? They paused their operations or taking submissions until they achieved the nonprofit status, right? And they then applied for funding. They were able to successfully, obtain funding, right? They were, whatever opportunities they applied to, and then they opened back up, right? So it's possible. It's possible that, achieving a nonprofit status and applying to opportunities and succeeding in getting funding. Some of the funding, opportunities I've seen are 5,000, 10,000 or more totally. I think I've seen some that are even 20,000. So, it's awesome, the opportunities that are out there, but not everyone is able to get those. So if you're someone who struggles with really doing things on time, or not as organized in terms of like financial documentation, right, it's probably not for you, the nonprofit status. You have to really have good records and documenting everything you do. You should be able to trace where everything went financially, in terms of like your lit mag or journal, right? You want to have very, very thorough financial records, because you can, I'm sure we all are aware of the IRS, right? And things like that, right? So, yeah. Anyways, it's very tricky, again, it's not easy as pie. Just because you get a nonprofit status, it doesn't mean the funding opportunities are going to fall in your lap, right? It's something you really have to have, a lot of effort into, right? You have to put in the legwork. It's not going to be smooth sailing just because of that. There are tons of lit mag journals that have obtained that status, and nonprofit status, and it's very difficult, I think, it's not easy, I think, if you are, let's say you're just by yourself, right? And you have a massive publishing house, right? I think at some point in time, you need to establish volunteer staff or to have help there, because you're bound to, if you make a misstep in your records, or, tracing things, or forget, right? You're going to face, you could face penalties. You could face things if things aren't, adding up, like the numbers and stuff, right? You can't just pull those out of thin air, you have to really, be honest, truthful, and upfront of where all the money is going to, if you're lit mag journal press. And, I think there was an article Only Poems had by Shannon Mann. It could have been Shannon Mann, sorry. And I think it's still on their site, their blog, or I saw it on Substack when I subscribed to them a while back, yeah, I think it's on their website now. But anyways, maybe I'll drop a link to it so you guys can read it. But it states why they didn't become a nonprofit. And again, something that was mentioned, penalties, right? There are a lot of penalties. It can be quite messy to maintain that nonprofit status. It can be kind of dangerous, put you in dangerous waters if you're not following the, compliance of it. I don't know what all of it entails, because I haven't undergone the process myself. I would recommend, if you're thinking about it, to become a CLMP member. They have some additional resources there. They have some great info sessions where you could, or even swap knowledge with others, lit mags, editors, and founders. Totally. There are very helpful editors out there, founding editors, who totally are willing to help others, in the community, because they know how hard it is, to get started. So yeah, CLMP membership, I think, is a great way to find more information out there, to maybe talk to others in community besides me, because I don't have that experience, unfortunately, with the nonprofit status. I'm just aware of like some of the risk and obvious things to take consideration of it. And yeah, so a lot of lit mags or journals are on very, very tight budgets again, or barely work anything to really work with. They sometimes they don't see any, they break even, right? Or sometimes they face a loss, a negative for the year or the following even. And, some lit mags journals, founding editors are taking out their own pockets, their own salaries, their own savings to keep things going. It's very tough. It's very, very, very scary too, because you don't want to ever run into like legal trouble or, financial, penalties and things like that. It can be dangerous, as I mentioned this podcast, right? Some lit mags, journals, or even presses quite a bit, or any place dealing with royalties and payments have faced lawsuits. Totally. They have, if you look up, presses that face lawsuits over chapbook royalties, there's quite a few out there actually, they had to shut down because they weren't paying royalties out. They weren't doing good record keeping. They weren't doing all of that. They were falling, I don't know if they were falling behind, or some do, but it happens, and it can be a nightmare essentially, so you want to be very cautious, I think it's the nonprofit status, obtaining it. I think there again, benefits of that, right? More you can apply to the opportunities that are out there, right? You're not very limited in that. So yeah, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 opportunities and so forth, right? Every bit helps. And if you're able to successfully obtain that, usually you have to write a letter, right? I'm sure, and do a lot of letter writing, right? And your website, everything has to be very presentable. You want to really do that, go for it. However, consider the risk, right? I think it, for me, there's just two, I'm not sure. I considered it, right? I'm not saying I won't ever, try for the nonprofit status. But at this time, probably not, I would say, myself personally. Just because of how much risk are associated with. Like, if you do some research and digging into the fines and penalties, and it can be very, very high. It can wipe you out, right? It can be a very huge financial hit for you, and it's a lot of risk associated with that too. If you can do it, if you feel you can, by all means, go for it. If you want to establish a volunteer staff, or have a friend or family member or loved one involved, to oversee all of that, all of the number crunching, the logging, the record keeping, helping you out with that, then I think, totally go for it. If you're someone who's very organized and can file things properly, who can understand all of the what they're looking for in terms of that when they review everything, totally go for it. I would recommend, not just listening to my channel. There are other channels out there that discuss the pros and cons of becoming a nonprofit. Again, CLMP has, I believe, resources, on the nonprofit status and what it entails and everything. Again, I think there's filing fees and things like that. So I think the filing fees, it's within a couple $100, I think, I think so. I could be wrong. But yeah, it's hard, no doubt, I know quite a lot of lit magazine journals though did eventually become nonprofits, as they grew and grew and grew. Or some did it right away, within, as soon as possible, you can't get it instantly like that, like the snap of your finger, right? I think it undergoes a review process, right? Your application and all of that, the filing of it. So yeah, I'm not sure on the length or time span, but yeah, I think if you're going to do it, just be mindful. There are immense risks that you're taking with that, right? And I think the penalties are very, very scary. The fines, the amounts that you look up online, and some of the cases that have happened with nonprofits not complying, or facing even, or examples, right? Out there, it's pretty like, you're like, you don't want to face like paying $10,000, $12,000 because you didn't, file something properly, or numbers didn't add up, or, things like that. So, I think the penalties can really hit you hard, and you're probably gonna, it could face closure, your Lit Mag Journal over that. So I think it's a little bit too risky, Starting a Lit Mag Journal itself is a risk itself, or press even, right? Again, they're subject to lawsuits, especially if you're dealing with royalties and payments, right? You want to make sure those are put out on time, that you're paying writers on time, that you give them a date, right, of payment, right? You don't want to leave anyone hanging. Because you're dealing with money, and it's very, I wish I mentioned this a lot. I wish money didn't exist, but we all have bills to pay. We all have things, right? But yeah, it's just one of those things in the world that, it's very, very tough, right? Very tough. My dad always taught me, the importance of, financial management and staying on top of all that, for sure. But, it's not easy. It can be a headache, for sure, when you're doing a lot of things like that, I think as, a Lit Mag Journal press grows larger and larger, and you start, maybe paying a volunteer staff, or paying your staff and stuff like that, it can be very, very tricky to, you have to do a lot of very detailed record keeping if you're a nonprofit in terms of that, can be very, very, very tough. You have to log hours, all of that, set hours and all of that for staff, and establishing that for the nonprofit status. There are a lot of other, great books and audiobook series out there. I was trying to think of one to share you guys. I was listening to a couple too. But yeah, I honestly don't have a lot of experience in this area. It's like a gray area for me. I just know that, I was doing some research into it. And anytime I see penalties or fines or like $10,000 and up, I was like, probably not, I don't want to do anything like that, because, if you are not on top of that stuff, like your financial record keeping and filing things appropriately, it's going to be nothing but hot water for you, and it's going to be not good. So yeah, it's really up to you if you want to do the nonprofit status. I would recommend doing some more research beyond this podcast on it. It takes some time to really think about that, because it's an important decision. So yeah, again, I would recommend going to, looking into getting the CLMP membership, and, when you start your Lit Manger journal, right? And there are compliance requirements of CLMP as well that you have to meet as well. So just be mindful of all of that, right? So yeah, I personally, in the tech world, this is the additional bonus section of this. So I've worked with, nonprofits just in the tech space, I guess. There was this cool nonprofit, PCs for People. They would recycle technology, all the, we would oftentimes have laptops that stopped functioning or blue screened or had some bugs, or just were old, had reached their age, right? Recycled out computers, like, with once they hit their, expiration, on their warranty and coverage and all that stuff, or whenever they had reached their, time, was up. So yeah, and then mice, computer, keyboards, all of that, right? Yeah. So, all of that, would get recycled, or sometimes they were able to fix things, the computers, and give those back to others, right? To give them computer equipment, and things like that, yeah, very cool. PCs for People. I think they're still around. And yeah, so it's tough, nonprofits are not easy, but, to keep going, absolutely. Yeah, so CLMP, I think they also have a grant program, like, wasn't it like 5,000 or 10,000? I can't remember. But yeah, you can find more information on their page. It's only for nonprofits, right, who can apply to those things, right? Sure, CLMP has other, I think the Firecracker Awards and other things where others can apply and enter those, and doesn't, not required to be a nonprofit for that, right? But there are, certain, certain programs that they have, right? Grant programs where, they allow applications to, right? And there's a window for that, right? And you have to be a nonprofit. You have to apply for those. So yeah, I know when I was trying to look into funding opportunities, like, again, you have to be a nonprofit. You have to be a nonprofit, right? Nonprofit. So there are very few out there that I've come across that, don't have that, right? So it's pretty tough, So yeah, I just wanted to clarify, becoming a nonprofit doesn't, again, mean you'll have, automatically guaranteed opportunities to have funding to sustain yourself for the next 5, 10, 15 years. You have to do other things to offset cost again, whether that be a Patreon, have other series, maybe do anthologies, or, a book series, or maybe some other things. Maybe you host workshops or events or info sessions or feedback sessions. Some lit mags have feedback sessions others can attend. A workshop, they meet the editor, talk about work, and exchange feedback and thoughts, and some interesting things like that to really help cover expenses. I know a lot of places are doing workshops nowadays, and I think that's a great way to help others and also help your lit mag journal press at the same time, right? Because that can go back into sustaining the publication, right? So additional feedback and helping others, and they're also helping your lit manger journal at the same time. So it's a win-win, so yeah, every bit helps, Can't stress that enough. You have to do other things, whether your publication be online or not, print or both, right? Costs are always going to be a thing, right? No matter what your structure is, you're going to have some sort of cost with your lit mag journal or press. Now, yeah, totally. If you start a Substack or, let's say a Substack publication, there's no money to start that up at all, right? I mean, you could get your own domain and attach it to the Substack, right? And put the URL tied to it, right? But yeah, still, that's very minimal, right? So you could start, I showed you, right, various spaces. Others have mediums, others have, blog or blogspot publications, right, as the foundation. But, there's still some cost, with running a publication. I think, a very, organized one, and that, if you want to get into print one day and stuff like that, there's absolutely going to be some cost there, right? You have to get test prints, proof copies. You have to, there's software, right, for building issues out and things like that. You have expenses of some kind, nearly every lit mag journal does, maybe a submission management system or not. So yeah, it's possible to have a online lit mag journal and to have very, very minimal cost, barely any, right? But I think if you want to start paying writers for their work and things like that, right, you need to sort of find some sort of way to establish that, right? You could do crowdfunding, right? I mentioned some lit mag journals and presses on here have done crowdfunding. They've done donation windows. They've done, Patreon, right? Membership access levels and things like that. You can do, Substack, paywall, different sections or bonus content, right? But, yeah, whatever you do, just be consistent in it. And yeah. So yeah, that's all I have to say. I hope this helped you. So really just keep in mind, there can be very hefty fines and penalties for becoming a nonprofit, if you're not in compliance with the regulations of that status and maintaining everything in a very organized manner. Yeah. So that's all I have to say. I hope it gave you some insight on that. At this time, again, I'm not going to do the nonprofit status or anything with my own lit mag journal press, but, it's something that crossed my mind for sure, because again, when you go to look out for more opportunities for funding, it's like, oh, can't, because we're not a nonprofit, right? So yeah, not to say there aren't opportunities out there for, getting funding, if you're not a nonprofit, but there aren't as many. It's more of like you have to do some digging, some hunting, researching on that, right? So, some lit magazine journals, I think they're sponsored, or they have sponsors or others who, help fund their lit mag journal, and things, or press even. Yeah. So yeah, that's all I've got to say. So, take care, guys. And I hope this helped you. Yeah. P.S. guys, so yeah, if you're not a nonprofit, again, you totally still can intake donations, right? Lit mags, journals, presses, right, that aren't nonprofits, they typically, again, as a shared on this podcast, right, intake donations through, it could be a submission management system, right? Like, we use Subfolio, right? There's an optional tip that others can leave. And, other submission management systems, right, out there totally, you could facilitate, optional, check boxes for that too, and yeah. I've seen some lit mags and journals, of course, use like, GoFundMe pages, even Give Butter, right? Where there are options to do recurring donations and things like that, for the month or one time even, so yeah, you still can do that, if you're not a nonprofit. I would say, whether you're not a nonprofit or not, you still have to be very on top of your, financial management. You should be aware of, your overall monthly bill, each month, and yeah, and even your overall, expenses, each year. Totally. You should know those numbers, because it's if you intend on, keeping your lit mag journal or press, running long term. Yeah, you want to know, your site costs this much to maintain, your submission management system costs, X amount of dollars a month, and so forth, right? All of your expenses. You want to know your monthly expenses, your yearly expenses. You want to really know that year to year and year, right? Some don't keep, Excel spreadsheets of everything, but it's absolutely a good idea to, you know, be aware of, if someone were to ask you, what are your monthly expenses? What's your your annual expenses for your Lit Mag Journal Press? Did you, break even? Did you lose money? How much did you lose? How much did you earn from this or this publication or series? It's a good idea to calculate that, especially if you intend on, of course, putting the, sales of a publication right towards the next one and the next one. Now, again, starting some setups, have very minimal expenses or barely anything, like, if you're starting a Substack publication, right? So yeah, just keep that in mind. Just be very, very organized. The nonprofit status, I think it's you could almost say it's that movie Eagle Eye. I feel like it's like almost like that. You have an eagle eye over your transactions, all the money and the finances of your Lit Mag Journal Press or publishing house, right? So it's strict, because again, you can get in trouble if things aren't filed properly, in terms of like where all of the money went, for your publication, and if you're paying staff, right, that adds another layer of complexity, because there are things you have to do to comply, for that as well. Set hours for your staff and all of that, keeping track of their hours, and, it could be paid or volunteer staff, right? And when you pay writers for the work, same thing. You have to really keep tabs on all of that, be very, very organized, all of that. So yeah, again, it's an area I have very limited knowledge on, again, but just sharing my thoughts. Hopefully it helped. Tons of books out there on nonprofit status and, becoming a nonprofit, a lot of audiobooks too, and other, podcasts on this as well. And totally. And I've read from time to time a couple different blog posts or articles that fellow founding editors of Lit Mag Journals have created in regards to their decision on why they chose not to become a nonprofit and why some did actually end up, becoming a nonprofit. So maybe I think I showed you one on this podcast. Maybe I'll link one or two if I can find some examples for you guys so you can read those. Maybe beneficial, to hear to read others' experiences in terms of what led up to their decision, ultimately to become a nonprofit or to not become a nonprofit, right? So again, it's totally up to you. And I just wanted to, again, reiterate, there are risks with, becoming a nonprofit, totally, But it ultimately, for a lot of the funding opportunities out there, you have to be a nonprofit, right? That's what I've seen, again, as I shared on one of the very first episodes of this podcast, why lit magazine journals and presses often close, right? Financial pressure and things like that. So, but becoming a nonprofit's not going to automatically, again, solve, your funding problems or guarantee that you receive funding, right? It's something you have to apply for, right? Grants, opportunities, and things like that. I read somewhere that, I can't remember, somewhere on Substack or someone had made a comment, not on my publication. It could have been Lit Mag News or somewhere else. But there was a founding editor, I think, founding editors who have, really, applied year after year after year, really, set aside a bunch of time to apply to grant and funding opportunities throughout every year. And that's how they sustained the publication. That's how they really kept it going. But it's not always guaranteed again. So, if there is a year where funding gets slashed, then you're oftentimes resorting to donations from, the community or, even, and things like that, right? It's always a good idea, I think, to maybe facilitate a Patreon or, additional series, and not just relying on one thing, because, anything can happen, even like, distribution, things can happen, all kinds of things can happen if you're publishing, publication. I mean, especially if you're, getting into print issues and things like that. But yeah, you can do digital, again, subscriptions, digital issues. You can digitize everything. Could be completely online, completely digital, publication. There are risks either way, with everything you do in life, right? But Yeah, so that's all I have to cover, and I hope this episode helped. So the next couple we might go back to just going over a couple different lit magazine journals, presses, unique setups, or yeah, and that's basically it, guys. So take care, yeah.